This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.
I'm Tom Hoppe, and I'm your host of the Most Painful Podcast. On our last episode, we discussed how yoga can help with chronic pain with Neil Pearson, so tune in and listen. He had some helpful tips. In Season 1, we spoke to Eric Schumacher, a retired U.S. Army Surgeon General, about how the U.S. VA is changing the way it treats chronic pain for veterans, and how it could help with treatments for other Americans. In the past, Canada and the United Kingdom have partnered on many research projects for veterans' well-being. Today, I'm joined by Dominic Aldington, who is a pain doctor with the National Health Service in United Kingdom. And we'll talk about what they are doing for veterans. Dominic, welcome to the show.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for having me along.
Dominic, maybe you can start with just a short background of yourself and what you do in the UK.
So I, in the mid-80s, was a reservist with a bunch called the Honourable Artillery Company in London, who were founded in about 1547. So think they're the oldest regiment in the British Army. And we had quite an interesting role back then. I then went to medical school. And whilst I was at medical school, I joined the regular army, joining the Royal Army Medical Corps. I qualified as a doctor. And the training then and now means that most of your medical life is spent in civilian hospitals. But then if you are needed by the military, you then deploy. So I spent 24 years in the regular army as a doctor. I became an anesthesiologist. And whilst I deployed as an anesthesiologist in various operational deployments, I also developed a specialist interest in pain and became the subject matter expert in pain to the Defence Medical Services. And my remit was to oversee the management of pain from the point of wounding really to the point of pension. So when the servicemen left the service, so that was the pre-hospital environment, field hospitals, transport there and back, and then during rehabilitation back here. So I did that for a while, and then I left the army when I thought I had little more to give, about 7 or 8 years ago. And since then, I've been working in the National Health Service, so the UK's standard service. I do some private practice, but that's not relevant for here. But I've also got involved with the management of veterans, particularly their pain. And we've developed a course that I'll talk a little bit more about later. So that's kind of me in a nutshell.
I mean, this is quite interesting because as I hear you talk, you're seeing right from the battlefield to when the person leaves the service. And, research that we've had in Canada here, we know veterans suffer from chronic pain twice out of the Canadian population. I don't know if it's the same in the UK, if you have a higher rate of pain among veterans than you do the civilian population.
I'm not sure anyone's actually done the numbers on that. Chronic pain is pretty common, actually, isn't it? So it's about 15 to 20% of most populations. Anyway, I think that within the veteran population, there are some confounding factors, though, that make them different to civilians. I think not just their expectations and their background and things like that. I think also the way they speak, the vernacular, the vocabulary is different. And of course, if you're going to have a therapeutic relationship with someone, you need to be able to communicate with them. And whilst soldiers, sailors and airmen do speak in English, they do have their own vocabulary. So they get a little bit frustrated when they slip back into the vernacular and people don't really understand what they're talking about, but they're often talking about something quite important to them. And so not understanding that military language, I think, can be a big barrier to forming that relationship with them. I think the other big difference is that PTSD and complex PTSD are significantly more common within the veteran chronic pain population. And unfortunately, many of the civilian providers get a little anxious at that. And some groups, so some of the multidisciplinary groups, some of the pain management programs are quite reluctant to take some veterans on because of their mental health. It's not just the veterans. I mean, they'll do it with anyone with significant mental health problems. But then makes it all very complex.
And that's very interesting because, I mean, we've been doing some work here in Canada with one of the clinics here in Vancouver, Change Pain, where we've put in a veteran program. And one of the parts of that was to educate the clinical staff on veteran culture, mindset, and identity. Because as you know very well, that does tie into chronic pain. If a person is struggling with purpose and they don't know what to do with their life anymore, and they kind of end up sitting on the couch. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's interesting that's the same issue.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem, isn't it? Yeah,
It's huge. Yeah. Yeah. It's a huge problem.
yeah.
You've talked about a program that you have in the UK. Is this a general program for everybody with chronic pain, or is there this kind of a specialty program for veterans in themselves?
Well, without wanting to derail the talk too much, I think I need to describe the lay of the land over here generally. So,
Okay.
whilst defence is obviously a national thing, UK PLC, as we say, is defence. Healthcare in the United Kingdom is now devolved down to the different administrations. So, whilst we have a National Health Service, the one in England is different to the one in Scotland, is different to the one in Wales, is different to the one in Northern Ireland. So what you get as a veteran depends on which part of the United Kingdom you live in. It's not like a federal thing or whatever you might call it. So I can only really speak with knowledge about the English bit. The other devolved nations or administrations do have things for veterans, and some are quite advanced, but dare I say it, some may not be quite so advanced, and they've all got their reasons for that. So, for example, physical health issues with veterans in England is championed by an organisation called Op Restore, so Operation Restore, and then the mental health support is provided by Op Courage. And again, that's a bit of a problem because it's rare to have a physical problem without a bit of a mental problem. But, that's just the system we've got. So it's all a bit of a mixture. What I'm coming down to say is it's very variable. So if you are a veteran who happens to, about 4% of our population are veterans, but of course, most of those are towards, not many of them are very young. It's probably, they've all seen a few Christmases because people who did their national service, for example, are still classed as veterans. A veteran in the UK is anyone who's done one day's work for the King or the Queen.
Okay, which is different than here a little bit.
So yeah, so there are quite a few veterans, but a lot don't recognise themselves as veterans. They don't think they are, or don't want to identify as such. But that's a shame because there are a lot of assets available for veterans that aren't available for the rest of the population.
So in your system, you were saying it's a national system, but you have these two, Op Restore and Op Courage. Now, are they private
Yeah, so that's within England. But that's within England. If you live in Northern Ireland, it's a completely different system.
Okay.
I don't want to go into the politics of Northern Ireland at the moment, but it's a little bit awkward for British military veterans. And Scotland's different as well, and so is Wales. But within England, that's how they've split it up. Yeah.
Okay. So how does that work? If a veteran now is, in the service, they're obviously going to be looked after by someone like yourself, who was a military doctor.
Yeah.
Once they leave the service, how does that work? Can you kind of just describe that process?
Yeah, so once you leave the service, you are technically a civilian now. You might be a veteran as well, but you are a civilian. And so the expectation is you will use your local family doctor, your primary care provider, who is the gatekeeper to everything else by and large. And the Royal College of General Practitioners, so the primary care physicians, they've got a program going on to get practices up to speed on veterans. And so they're doing quite a bit of education on that. So the identification of veterans, but then some of their special needs and requirements. If you then have an injury or a complaint that is directly related to your time in service, then you'd be referred into Restore or Op Courage, depending on whether it's physical or mental. And the idea then is they put you in front of people who have a better understanding of a veteran's experience and needs than may be the case if you just saw a chap down the road. Yeah, so that's kind of the way that bit of the system works. Pain sort of sits in the middle, and so if your primary complaint actually was persistent pain and you didn't tie up with either of those organisations, then you would probably just be seen in your local civilian pain clinic, where the chances of you meeting someone who has an understanding of veterans and service life and experience and some of the three-letter abbreviations we use and things like that are pretty thin on the ground. So it can become a little awkward. So as a result, I often get referred specifically patients from both Op Courage and Op Restore into my civilian clinic, and then if it's clinically appropriate, expedite their appointment and get them in front of me rather than one of my colleagues. But what we can provide there is really as much as most civilian clinics can provide. We just have a slightly different communication style, perhaps. But one of the great things is actually what's provided by the third sector. So that's the charities. And charities there's lots of plus points and minus points to them, but we'll just look at the good bits, I think. The charities, so I'm involved with one called Supporting Wounded Veterans, and their original aim was to help military veterans get back into some form of employment, paid or not paid. But what they noticed was a lot of the people they were dealing with were complaining of pain problems and weren't getting to see anyone. So they'd found me, and together with them, we've set up some sort of pain reviews, which we do online. So it's just two veterans having a chat about things. They don't become my patient, but we're just having a chat. And so I'm able to see anyone throughout the United Kingdom rather than just the English ones.
Right.
And then those that wish, we put onto our version of a pain management program, which we call our pain resilience program. So it's a slightly different aim to the normal civilian things.
And I'd like to get to that, but as you're talking, where's the role of Veterans Affairs in England?
Yeah, so in the UK, we do have an Office for Veterans Affairs, which is actually part of the government. So it does have a remit that sees itself across, the four devolved administrations, but it's not a direct provider of healthcare. So it can nudge and make suggestions, but it has no budget of its own. It can advise or suggest research, and it's doing some research projects at the moment. But as far as actually delivering a service, it doesn't have any remit at all.
Well, that's interesting because here, Veterans Affairs, for like when a veteran's released in Canada or released from service or even prior to release, they will apply through Veterans Affairs Canada for their injury, and they'll go through the process to see if that injury is service related and the extent of the injury, quality of life. And from there, they will then, if they're qualified, they'll be entitled to payment for physio.
Yeah, so the
that chiro, that kind of thing. Yeah.
a bit like the North American view, but the way it works here is that you're a civilian, so you get the same service as any other civilian, but we'll try and tweak it if we can.
Yeah, yeah, which is similar here. Like when I released, I had to, locate a family doctor under provincial healthcare. I had
Yeah.
to do this and that. Then they would refer me to other things. However, if it is related to like going into a pain clinic, for example, they can perhaps bill for allied health services. And perhaps the medical side, trigger point injections and that kind of thing would be done under provincial health. So there's kind of a blend system.
Yeah.
So
Here,
that's interesting to hear the differences.
I guess it all revolves around the National Health Services being free at the point of care or point of use. So these billing concepts are a little strange for us.
I'm sure they are. But getting back to the paint program, I find it interesting you said that it's a little different than what you provide for the civilian population. So maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so this has been developed through this charity, and as I said, what we noticed was a lot of veterans weren't getting support through the normal system because of their mental health issues and things. And so, I mean, the other point was they were geographically quite separate. So what we decided to do was to develop an online program. So it wasn't, a face-to-face that became online. We set up from the outset to have an online program. And as a result, it doesn't matter which bit of the United Kingdom you're in, we'll see you. And in fact, we've seen veterans who live in Europe, and one, I think, was living in the Middle East as a veteran, but able to join in. I mean, yeah, there's a bit of a time issue, as you've noticed, but, geography is no longer that important. The sort of basic remit, I guess, is to get a group of 7 or 8 veterans together during phase 1, we provide them with information. So it's not quite death by PowerPoint, but I think it might feel like that a little bit. So we talk to them about pain and what it really is, not what their mothers taught them, but about the importance of the emotional component and how that's affected by other things. We talk about mental resilience and what it is and how to look after yourself and well-being. We do quite a bit on medication and how often it doesn't do what it says on the tin, and that the veteran themselves needs to get a grip of their medication and work out really, does it help you to be a better you? And so the wider aspects. We also teach them about how to manage awkward people like me. So what should you do when you go for an appointment with your doctor? And how can you best navigate the system, because it's easy to lose that. We do a little bit on physical therapy and really the fear of movement, the kinesiophobia, and try and get over that. And then the last bit, which is very different, is that we also spend a bit of time on other opportunities for education, training, and employment, whether that's paid or unpaid, because we're trying to get people to, keep going. And that's very rare within most medical type pain management programs, that social side. But of course, if we agree that pain is a biopsychosocial problem, you've got to address that as much as, but most things don't. So that's sort of phase 1. And then after that, they as a group stick together and they have regular meetings that we facilitate. And then we start stepping back, hoping that they will continue as a mutual support group. Now, lots won't, but many of them do stick together. And then when we finish our engagement with them, that's it. We just hope they'll keep going and keep looking after each other. And some of the groups have been incredibly successful. They might live hundreds of miles away, which I know for you in Canada means nothing. That's around the corner. But over here, it's a bit of a thing. But they'll arrange to meet up, and halfway or whatever. And that's good. And that's really what we've been hoping will happen.
And that's interesting you say that, because that's exactly what we've been working on over here. So my kind of passion is the identity and mindset portion, and using a coaching model to help veterans, because I mean, as you know, veterans come from a institutionalized dependent culture, and we have to make them independent again. And I like the idea of the education on pain and pain science and safe movement, because we don't have that in the service. At least here we don't have that. I would imagine it sounds like it's the same in England as well, that knowledge isn't available in service for veterans.
Yeah, I'm not sure but yeah, so that's kind of what we do. But the other thing that's unique, well, yeah, it is unique, is that, I mean, this course was designed by the veterans. So every iteration of the course, we get the feedback, and because there are layers and layers, if someone says this is nonsense or this isn't clear, we can change it immediately. It's delivered by veterans, so everyone who's actually doing the talking is a veteran, and it's for veterans, so they have a safe space in which they can talk. And some of the times it's just naughty stories of naughtiness happening when they were youths, but some of the time it's more than that, and it's that support for some dark things.
Yeah.
But they're in that safe space where they know they can talk to one another.
I like that because helping veterans really, I think, moves the markers in many ways. So I think that is just a wonderful idea.
Absolutely. And then when they were serving, part of the job was to look after the bloke next to them. So we're just continuing
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
the boy or the girl next to them. But I mean, we're just, they know how they're meant to do it. It's just reminding them.
yeah, and then adding extra knowledge that they may not have, and hopefully
Hmm.
they become more independent. I think for it. Dominic,
Yeah,
I love this topic, and I could probably sit here and talk to you for many hours. But we've come to the end of the show, so I'd like to thank you for your insight. I like the way the program's structured. It sounds like an excellent program that you're doing with the veterans. So thanks for being on the show.
Tom, it's been an absolute delight. Thank you for asking. And if any of you chaps can't sleep at night, they can join our program.
Okay. We'll just finish off here. So, to our audience, our next show is going to be on cannabis and if it has the same impact as opioids, and that'll be with Jason Bussa, who's just completed research on that result. And the results will surprise you. For feedback on the show or for more information on chronic pain, you can visit our website, veteranschronicpain.ca. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at Chronic Pain COE and on Instagram at Chronic Pain _COE. Once again, Dominic, thanks very much. Love the program you're talking about. And to our audience, keep the hope alive. Thank you.
The Most Painful Podcast is produced for the Chronic Pain Center of Excellence by Story Studio Network and Eye Contact Productions.